Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Let us rejoice as the unofficial beginning of summer is just about here. Warm weather has hit the Northeast, although it's raining right now, so you may hear some rain or even some thunder in the background. When it's all said and done, there's still daylight at 8:45 p.m. How could it get any better than that? Of course it could. Another podcast with yours truly, defining everything that's going on in the world of sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And we have a bit to get into when it comes to not only what's happening in sports, we have a French Open that's going to tip off here over the weekend. And what does that mean for one Rafael Nadal? I'll get into that, as well as the Indy 500, which my annual discussion about it, which is very minimal, but I'll unpack a little bit of that later on. Of course, all the baseball, the Phillies riding high. Are they the best team in the sport considering what they've done over the first 50 games of the season? And then on top of that, have the best record after 50 games since a team 23 years ago. And if you do the math between now and then, I'm sure you can figure out which team that was. And here's your hint. They did not win a World Series, let alone not make it to a World Series. So if you can't come up with the answer between now and the baseball segment, then shame on you. No, I'm only kidding. But I have to start off with what's happening with the playoffs, NBA, NHL, as the conference finals have commenced. Although tonight you will have the Edmonton Oilers going to Dallas for a game one, and what a crazy ending to the game 7 the other night between the Vancouver Canucks and Edmonton Oilers. So I'll touch on that as well. But I'm going to start off with the association as I lace up my high tops and get on the court, because game one last night, and I'll start there. I'll go to the Celtics afterwards. The Dallas Mavericks went into Minnesota, the Twin Cities, and they were able to steal a game. Granted, not as in the same fashion what the Celtics did in their home court on Tuesday night, but whenever you get that game one under your belt, knowing that you have house money going into game two, which will be tomorrow night in Minnesota, and now the pressure is squarely on the T-Wolves, despite the fact that they're a team that has played very well and for the most part in front throughout this postseason. Granted, they were down, I get it, 3-2 in the previous series to Denver and then came back to win those two games. But for the Mavericks, you have to give them a lot of credit and a lot of resolve, especially in that fourth quarter. Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving combined for 63 points, 33 and 30 respectively. You also got some big-time contributions from guys that we have come to know here over the course of this playoff run, whether your name is P.J. Washington, whether your name is Daniel Gafford, guys like that who have been able to put their hands in the pot to try to do whatever it takes to win these games. And even though the Minnesota Timberwolves, they imploded down the stretch, a lot of turnovers, even their head coach Chris Finch said that they had no composure, especially toward the final stretch of that fourth quarter. And then I thought the biggest play at that juncture of the game at 104-102, that putback from Karl-Anthony Towns, which was a very tough call. It looked like it was about to bounce off of the cylinder, but because he dunked it home and with the ball could have bounced around, it probably would have not gone through the hoop. But because he was in the cylinder when he slammed it home, to me, that was the big part of the game, because I would have tied the game. Who knows what would have happened at that point. And remember, there goes your thunder right there. At 102-98, that's when the Mavs had a lead, and then you had a big three from Luka, and that's when the Mavericks started to not only take over the game at that point, but also took the lead. And even at 104-102, they negated that putback, and the T-Wolves were unable to go on a little bit of a run on their own right to win the game, and therefore the Mavericks come up shining and looking like roses, to where now they have the home court in their advantage. It's the first game one win that they've had in this postseason, because remember, they lost game one in LA to the Clippers. They also lost game one to OKC, and now here they are riding high and looks like a team that could be primed to get themselves together to make it to an NBA final. Now, there's still plenty of series to go. It's only one game. You can't get crazy. And I would think Minnesota will play a lot better and clean up their act, especially when it comes down to crunch time. There, as we saw there last night, it was the total opposite of what we've seen with the Timberwolves. And all you got to do is just look to the previous series and even just Game 7, when they came from behind in that second half and then were able to take a 10-point lead before they not necessarily hung on, because they won by 8 in that Game 7. But I would think they'll clean things up. But the one thing that you have to worry about if you're a Timberwolves fan is that not only do you have one closer on your team, and chances are it's going to be Luka. Kyrie seems to be a guy that would rather not necessarily defer to Luka, but when it's his time to take a game over, he will do so. And I'm sure Luka, even though as great as he's been throughout the start of his career, I'm sure he knows that he has a guy in Kyrie that he could trust, a guy that's been there, been in the spotlight, made big shots, game-winning and game championship series winning shots. So that's the good thing about the two of them. They're able to bounce off one another. No one has to steal a spotlight. No one has to take over a game and feel as if, oh, wait a minute, well, this is my team. I've been here longer. I should be the guy that's taking this last shot. Egos are put aside. And that's the way you're going to win a championship, if you have those two guys in tune. And what we've seen here throughout this postseason and pretty much throughout the regular season, they have certainly been like oil and vinegar. So for the Mavericks right now, with a good step in the right direction, and the T-Wolves, there certainly will be heard from, and I think that they will win tomorrow night based on what the coaches said, and I'm sure they're going to get their act together and make sure that they tidy those things up and not have a scenario where it is crunch time and people are starting to fumble, bumble, and stumble their way to the finish line, and then therefore come out with a loss and then have to regroup and kind of go back to the drawing board in order to get things right for a Game 2 and beyond. So that's what we have there. I think it's going to be a long series. I picked the Mavericks to win this series, so we're off to a good start there based on my prediction. As far as the East goes, now that is a game that I'm sure the coaching staff, led by Rick Carlisle, their team, maybe even the front office, they haven't slept a wink since Tuesday night, because that was a game that I'm sure they may rue the day that they lost, because they actually had that game in hand. They had no business losing that game. And to give the Celtics life, and that's one of the things that we've seen with the Celtic team over the last few years. They haven't been able to close, and they have closers on their team, but they haven't been able to win that close game on a consistent basis. Yes, I could go back to the history books to talk about these playoff runs where they did win a Game 6 in Philadelphia when they were down, or the Game 6 in Milwaukee 2 years ago when they were also down and Jason Tatum bailed them out on both of those instances. And yes, I could go through a number of games where the Celtics were able to prevail even when the game was close. But there are also a ton of games that I could talk about where they weren't able to come up big and they came up very small. All I got to do is look at the Heat games last year in the conference finals, or even a Game 4 against the Golden State Warriors where they were up 94-90 with 5 minutes to go and they weren't able to seal the deal then. So this Celtic team, we all know they're very erratic, unpredictable, and it looked like they were going to lose that game after jumping out to a 12-0 lead to start off the game. Indiana came back very resourceful. They're a high-potent, high-octane offensive team. And what you saw there was a team that was kind of scuffling there in the middle part of the third quarter where the Celtics had a 92-79 lead. And at that point, I thought to myself, maybe this is where the Indiana Pacers are going to start to really fall back. That the quick turnaround from Sunday, winning a Game 7 in New York, now Game 1 in the conference final was going to rear its ugly head to the point where, not to say they were going to be blown out, but they may not even come back in the game. But that wasn't the case. Pascal Siakam obviously contributed big time. Tyrese Halliburton had that three at the end of the third where it went off the backboard and rattled around before it went through the hoop. And the Pacers played very well here to the point where they had a 5-point lead with about a minute and change to go, 115 to 110. And then they also had a 3-point lead on 2 occasions. At 46 seconds to go when Andrew Nembhard hit that shot to give it a 3-point lead, and then the Celtics were unable to capitalize with a basket of their own. And then with about 27 seconds to go, for whatever the reason, Tyrese Halliburton and Aaron Nesmith couldn't get together at midcourt where the ball went out of bounds. Celtics have another opportunity to where Derek White looked like he had an open layup, which was the right play. They didn't need to shoot a 3 at that point. But for whatever the reason, the layup didn't go through, and Jason Tatum with the putback after getting an offensive rebound. Back of the rim, rebound by the Pacers, and now we're looking at 10 seconds left and a scenario where the Celtics are going to have to foul. Hopefully, the player that they do foul misses both free throws so they can keep it a one-possession game. But as it was, Andrew Nembhard with a inbound pass that went off the fingers of Pascal Siakam. Dangerous because the momentum was going toward the Celtic basket. You want to go the opposite way, and I understand it's easier said than done now. And even when I think about Rick Carlisle, what he said in the postgame, how he should have called a timeout there and regrouped to have a better inbounds play. As it was, Siakam, the ball was out of bounds, clearly off of his fingertips. And now the Celtics get another crack at it to where in the corner, Drew Holiday finds Jaylen Brown with the three. And I get it that they had a foul to give, but because Jaylen Brown was pinned in the corner, and I thought Pascal Siakam did the right thing by just squaring up on him, because the last thing he wants to do is foul, and I get it. You want to, even on the inbounds, and even dead in the corner as Jaylen Brown was, the last thing you wanted to do was slap him or even put him in a bear hug, because if he does get a shot off and it goes in, it's a 4-point play. And even though Rick Carlisle defended that, and I thought he was right, because when you're in that part of the court and you think that it's going to be tough sledding because you got to worry about Jaylen Brown going out of bounds, and it's a scenario where as long as you square up on him and put a lot of pressure between he and the out of bounds, then you're just going to take your chances there. And as it was, Jaylen Brown pump faked, and as he went up for the second shot or shot attempt, it went in. Tied the game, and then in the overtime, even though the Pacers got a three, but the biggest play there was the and one with Jason Tatum, and then, of course, he was able to seal it with a three to make it 127-103, and the Celtics go on to win a 5-point victory when it's all said and done. And the Pacers, I'm sure they looked at that as one, it's going to be tough to erase. I'm sure doing shoot-around, probably right about now as I'm speaking, they're probably going over that, making sure that they are just in tune. They played great basketball there the other night, and they know that if they could go out there tonight and get a win, they'll still have a chance to steal the home court from the Celtics, and I'm sure they're going to want to do that considering that they've been perfect at home throughout this postseason. But that is one that if the Pacers do lose the series, they're going to look at that game one as the reason why they lost that series. Because now they're going to have to win 4 of the next 6, and in essence, when you think about it, they should have won that game. As I mentioned, no business losing. So it's almost as if they have to win 5 games in order for them to go on to an NBA final. And as I said, this was going to be a series that would probably go 6 games. Not to say it's going to be a 5-game series based on what happened there Tuesday night. But I think the Celtics, hopefully this will stick with them, knowing, and even in the postgame, I know Jaylen Brown said that we certainly didn't play our best. We have to tidy things up here. And even Joe Mazzulla, the coach, said the same thing. They knew that they got away with murder getting this game here in game 1 on Tuesday night. So hopefully they look at that as motivation going into this game, because you know that the Pacers are going to come at them. And one thing, hopefully the Celtics play their pace and not the Pacers' pace. Because if they're thinking that they could go into a track meet up and down the court, Celtics, yes, they live and die by the 3-ball, as we know. But if they want to get into an open court, and yes, there will be fast break opportunities, but the last thing they want to do is try to make this a track meet to the point where they're playing their brand of basketball and not their own. So just keep that in mind as we move it along in the series. If the Celtics win tonight, obviously they'll put themselves in good shape to win this series, where the Pacers will have to win 4 out of 5. But if it's 1-1, who knows? Does it come back to Boston 2-2? For a pivotal game 5, or we'll have to wait and see. A lot of permutations there when it comes to this team, because as we all know, the Celtics are just very and wildly unpredictable, and I can't trust them as far as I can throw them. And the Pacers, they're going to play fast and loose and had every right to win that game there the other night, but who knows? Tonight, to me, is going to be a coin flip. I don't think it's going to be any way, shape, or form a Celtic dominant performance, or not to say they have to dominate, but just a game where they could go running away and somewhat of a rocking chair type game, whether it's a 117, 105 type of win. They're going to have to play better defense. The Pacers have shot well, and it's going to be a very competitive, and I would think, before it's all said and done, a hotly contested series, similar to what we could see out west. So that's what we have with the NBA, and I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, having Dallas win game 1 certainly adds a lot of intrigue into that series. And with the Pacers almost winning game 1, certainly adds intrigue, because you would think that the Pacers are going to go in there tonight and give it all they got to try to get back to Indy tied at 1. So we will certainly pay attention. You know I'll be on top of it as the NBA Conference Finals move it along. Now, I'm not going to get into the All-NBA teams. I can break that down. At the end of the day, we could quibble about who should have been first team, second team, etc. So I won't get into that, and I understand that's a part of the landscape there with the NBA, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. Obviously, there's other things I want to get to. Maybe somewhere down the road, I'll analyze it and bring it up. But as of right now, yes, we could talk about who were the top 5 players and who's going to get the Supermax contract based on their eligibility of becoming a first team or second team, third team All-NBA player. Yes, we could dissect that, but as of right now, it's about the competition on the court, and we'll see where the dust settles, especially when it comes to free agency. In one Jason Tatum, who did make first team All-NBA, but we know he's going to get a big-time payday at some point this summer. Now let me lace up my skates. Let me go to the NHL Conference Finals began last night at MSG between the Panthers and Rangers. I'll get to that in a second. I want to rewind to Monday night, where the Edmonton Oilers had a Game 7 against the Vancouver Canucks, and in typical Oiler fashion, but thankfully for them, they were able to survive. They jumped out to a 3-0 lead into the third period, and you thought to yourself, all right, is Vancouver going to get that next goal to make it a game? Because if it was going to be 4-0, and even though you can't trust Edmonton 100%, but you would think that if the Canucks got the next goal after that to make it 3-1, all right, maybe we could see whether or not that the Oilers are going to hang on here, or maybe even try to add some pressure to maybe get that next goal, knowing that Vancouver's coming. And it's interesting because when Vancouver cut it to 3-1, there was a play that I'm not going to say was forgotten, but one to keep in the back of the mind, and only because it was sandwiched between the first Vancouver Canuck goal and the second goal, because I believe with 5:51 to go, Philip DiGiuseppe had a not clear-cut breakaway, but because of a pass right across the slot and into the area where DiGiuseppe was heading to the net, and it was just between he and Stuart Skinner, and I thought to myself, this could be 3-2 right here, and he took a shot, tried to go top shelf to the left, and went over the net, and of course it gets forgotten because it was 3-1, but then just moments later, the Canucks get closer, they make it 3-2, and now you thought to yourself, oh geez, if DiGiuseppe scored on that goal, this game probably would have been tied, and who knows what the Edmonton Oilers would have done from that point on. But good move by the head coach, Chris Knobloch. He called a timeout, settled his players down, got the goaltender, everybody off the ice, also gave his guys who were on the ice at that time a blow. Very smart, and even though they had to survive a JT Miller shot that was blocked, and give it up to also Leon Draisaitl for making some blocks on his own right with his stick, and the Oilers clamped down there, and even though JT Miller gave him a bit of a scare there in the closing seconds, thankfully the puck was blocked and went off to the corner. The Edmonton Oilers survived a Game 7, and they beat the Vancouver Canucks there 3-2 on Monday night. Brutal loss for the Canucks, another kick in the groin and punch in the gut to the fan base. We know that the Canucks, not in recent memory, but dating back to the 2011 finals where the Canucks had the home ice and they won the home teams won all the games between them and the Boston Bruins, and then what happens? They go home for a Game 7 thinking there's going to be a coronation, and they lose 4-0, get shut out, and then there was just an uproar in the streets and cars and fires and just havoc throughout the downtown Vancouver area. And I don't want to say that was the same thing there on Monday night. I don't think it was anything close to that. I haven't heard any news as far as mayhem taking place in the streets of Vancouver, but that is one that's going to sit with you. And even though Rick Tocchet, who did win the Jack Adams Coach of the Year, and that was based on the, 30-something games filling in when they fired Bruce Boudreau back in January, I believe. But for the Canucks, a long, bitter offseason awaits, and the Oilers make their second conference final in 3 years. Now, hopefully it doesn't go the same way that it did the first time around against the Colorado Avalanche. I believe they were swept that year, and that's when Colorado went on to the Stanley Cup Finals and won. But for the Oilers, let's see what they're going to do here as they're going to face off against the Dallas Stars tonight. The Stars, as we all know, they've also had their lapses and have been up and down despite the fact that they played well, and maybe you could arguably say that they could be the front runners to win the Stanley Cup when it's all said and done. But this series, how I look at it, I think Dallas is going to win the series. I'm going to root hard for Edmonton, and I thought I would never ever say that considering I hated the Edmonton Oilers when I was a teen. Mind you, being a diehard Islander fan, And even though the 4 straight cups that they won, especially that last one when they swept Wayne Gretzky, Harry Curry, Mark Messier, Glenn Anderson, Grant Fuhr, etc., Paul Coffey, when they swept the Oilers to win that 4th cup, and then they met a year later, which the anniversary was just a few days ago, when the Drive for 5, which would have matched the Montreal Canadiens of the late 50s, how the Islanders were going for that record. And even though the Islanders got to the, at the time, Northlands Coliseum, tied at 1, and had a 2-1 lead in game number 3. But from that point on, after Mark Messier deked out Gord Dineen, and that was it, the Oilers just steamrolled to a Stanley Cup. And I only bring that up because I hated those teams. I couldn't stand those teams. And as we all know, Edmonton went on to win not only a cup that year, the following year against the Philadelphia Flyers, 2 years later against the Flyers again in 87, and then the following year in 88 against the Boston Bruins. Before winning in 90, this was after Gretzky got traded to LA, but still, the early part of that decade belonged to the Islanders, but then after that, it was all Edmonton. So, of course, I couldn't stand that team, never rooted for them, hated them. And now here I am, 40 years later, rooting for this team to get to a Stanley Cup, and that's mostly in part because of Connor McDavid being the best player in the sport and wanting for him to get an opportunity to win a Stanley Cup. So now with all that said and done, how I look at this series, I think that the Stars are going to win the series in 6, but I think they'll have their lapses. I wouldn't be surprised that they go up 2-0 or even split this series and then maybe go to Edmonton and win those 2 games up there, considering how great they've been on the road. And for Edmonton, I could see them even winning a game 1. Maybe momentum carries them in. Dallas has had a little bit too much rest. And as we've seen here in game 1s with the Stars in this postseason, they lost a game 1 to Vegas. In fact, they lost the first 2 games before winning that series in 7. And then they had a 3-0 lead against Colorado before losing that and losing game 1 4-3. And Edmonton, to me, they are a mirror image of the Colorado Avalanche. A lot of offensive firepower. They're going to come at you with their top 2 lines. But their defense and goaltending, I think, is even more suspect than Colorado's. But I think Edmonton will be heard from in the series, but if they're going to be heard from, they're going to have to be heard from early because they're going to have to try to get game 1 at least. They could still get game 2 because, just like I mentioned, Dallas has their moments where, for whatever reason, they don't seem to be their dominant selves or their top-seeded number 1 out west selves throughout the course of this postseason, as I detailed. But I think these Stars just have a lot more resourcefulness. They're a team that has the advantage at goaltender with Jake Ottinger a lot better than Stuart Skinner. And I think that the Stars are going to prevail. I'm going to say 6. I'll give Edmonton 2 games. Part of it is based on Edmonton, but the other part is not trusting Dallas. And who knows, maybe the series will be a 5-game series. And I don't want to think that. I would hope that Edmonton will try to get at least 2 games, maybe one of these first 2 here and one of the 2 games in Edmonton. Or if not, watch them come back to Dallas up 3-1 and then they'll win a game 5 before losing a game 6. But I'd be shocked if it goes further than 6 games. If Edmonton takes it to a 7th game, that would be, I understand no moral victories, but that could be a building block for this organization, knowing that they were just 1 game away from a Stanley Cup final. Can they win this series? I think they can, but will they? I don't think they will. And based on everything that I just detailed. So that's what you have there. Game 1 tonight. Looking forward to that series. And then last night, the Panthers go into Madison Square Garden, and I said this on Monday's podcast, this is going to be a wild series. It's going to be a physical series, not in the physicality of yesteryear, going back 30, 40 years, but you have players on the Panthers that like to hit. As you saw there, Matthew Tkachuk throwing his body around, hitting Vincent Trocheck, getting the opening goal of the game. That stood for quite some time. But the Panthers, they have size, they have strength, and they also have a lot of game-breaking players. Whether your name is Matthew Tkachuk, Carter Verhaeghe. I get his name mixed up. I always say Verhaeghe, but it's Verhaeghe. So my apologies in the past for saying Verhaeghe. But Verhaeghe is always a Johnny on the spot, especially when it comes to overtime. We know about Alexander Barkov. We know about Sam Bennett, who got the empty netter there late, which was assisted by Matthew Tkachuk. And even though Sergei Bobrovsky is a guy that I've talked about in the past, but over the last year and then this postseason, he's been stellar. And he was the story last night, making 23 saves. But he made a lot of those saves big in the 3rd period because he only stopped 12 shots in the first 2 periods, and he had to make 11 saves in the final period, making big stops on Adam Fox. And for Bobrovsky, he's going to be the focal point of the Panthers going to the next round because, as we all know, Igor Shesterkin, who's a Vezina Trophy finalist, he's a guy that you know is going to be rock solid in net. And even though giving up the one goal to Kachuk, that stood until late where, for whatever the reason, and I get it, he was just trying to get the puck out of the way, but Alexis Lafreniere pulled a Steve Smith, speaking of Edmonton Oilers, think back to the 1986 conference final between the Oilers and Calgary Flames. Look that up on YouTube. But for Lafreniere to deflect the puck right between the legs of Shesterkin into the net, that pretty much sealed the game. 2-0 there late in the third period. And then, of course, they added on the empty netter for the Panthers to steal home ice and take a 1-0 series lead. Now, this is going to be a long series. I said it's going to be Rangers in 6, although I can see the Panthers winning in 6 or 7 because they're not going to be afraid to go on the road. We saw what they've done to the Boston Bruins in the previous series. They won all 3 of those games on the road. And then even in the series against Tampa, they won a game 3 before losing game 4. But this team isn't going to be afraid. They have last year to fall back on as far as being an 8th seed, going through the East and making it to a Stanley Cup final. And then so far what you've seen here with the Florida Panthers, they're not going to be afraid of the spotlight or afraid of the big bad Rangers, considering that they are the number 1 seed in the conference and pretty much number 1 overall. And if you want to throw in that President's Trophy and not really being tested, I know Carolina certainly gave them a bit of a scare in the previous series, but Florida's come to play. And here's the thing about this series, which could be just off the chain. I can see the Panthers winning tomorrow night. But then I could also see the Rangers winning the 2 games in Florida because you know there's going to be a big-time Ranger contingent, a lot of New Yorkers down in South Florida showing up at that building to root on their Broadway Blueshirts. So would I be shocked if Florida goes up 2-0, but then the Rangers come back to the Garden for a Game 5 tied at 2? Absolutely not. I could see the Rangers winning tomorrow night and then having the series come back to the Garden 2-2 as well. Or maybe even the Rangers come back 3-1. Any one of those combinations, I would not be shocked. That's how wild this series could be. And I hope it's a long series. I think it's going to go minimum 6, but I wouldn't be shocked if it goes 7. And I'm looking forward to this series as well. And I know that Edmonton winning, and I talked about this on Monday, the powers that be at the NHL, boy, they were dancing and drinking Dom Perignon into the night because the last thing they wanted to see was Vancouver, although they've been good and obviously it was a 2 seed. But they want to have the star power. And if you give truth serum to Gary Bettman and the suits there down in their Midtown headquarters, you know that they're going to want the Rangers there, not Florida. And that's no offense to the Panther fan or to that region, etc. And I want Florida to win. I'm rooting for them long and hard, big time. But for the suits at the NHL, they want an Edmonton Rangers Stanley Cup final. And I get it. People in the United States, they couldn't pick where Edmonton is on the map at gunpoint. But they know who Connor McDavid is. They know Leon Draisaitl. They know Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Evander Kane, etc. And of course, you can even look back. You have to go back 30, 40 years to the Edmonton Oilers history for them winning cups. And mind you, they went to a cup, as you recall, in 2007 as an 8th seed against the Carolina Hurricanes. And that was actually manned by Peter Laviolette. So you have a lot of interesting storylines if it does get to be Edmonton and New York. So let's see how this all shakes down. Obviously, we still have 1 series that hasn't even begun, and game 1 in the books where the Panthers go off into the night, and we'll be here for the next couple of days and see if they can win a game 2 before going back home, as the scene will shift to Sunrise, Florida. That's what I have with the NHL. Nothing else really that's going on with the National Hockey League. So let me turn my attention to Major League Baseball as I lace up my spikes and get into the batter's box, because a couple of interesting storylines here as we head into the Memorial Day weekend. And on Monday, I'll really give a nice 30,000 foot overview, which is not going to be much, people, because I can even argue right this very moment that 5 teams, count them on one hand, could win a World Series this year. And you know what? I'll save that for Monday. And if you're a baseball fan or a big-time sports fan, you know which 5 teams those are. But one of those teams that we would think will be in the running for a World Series, considering they were there 2 years ago and were this close last year before Arizona certainly spoiled that party, are the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies are currently 36-14. They'll close out their series against the Texas Rangers this afternoon down in the city of brotherly love. And to think The Phillies, who have gotten off to slow starts over the last 2 years, think about 2022, the year that they went to the World Series. They fired Joe Girardi pretty much around this time. Around Memorial Day, maybe a little bit after that, before anointing Rob Thompson as the manager of the team. And what did they do? They went off on a run, beat the Braves in the divisional series. Of course, they then beat the Cardinals in the wild card. And then in the championship series, beat the Padres before losing to the Astros, although they were up 2-1 in that series. But remember, they got no hit in Game 4, a combined no-hitter. And then they were unable to get another win after that. And then last year, same deal, slow start. All right, got the wild card, swept the Marlins, beat the Braves again, and then lose to the Arizona Diamondbacks, up 3-1 in the series. And also on top of that, 3-2, I should say, because it was 2-2, and then they won Game 6-1, and then they lost those 2 games in their building before just bowing out of the postseason at that point on. And who knows, maybe that was a rallying cry for the Phillies going into this year. They're currently 36-14. Tremendous start. They have a 5-game lead in the division, although the Braves have games in hand. But here's the one thing that just startled me. They have the best 50-game start since the 2001 Seattle Mariners. Now, I don't know if that's going to bode well if you want to look at the Mariners as the barometer. And, of course, you're going to look at that if you're a baseball fan. But we know the Mariners, they won 116 games, better than the 98 Yankees, if you recall. But what happened? The Yankees beat them in 5 in the championship series. So I'm sure that the Phillies do not want to have that same fate when we get to that point. But think about this. The Phillies, who their number 3 starter, Ranger Suarez, with Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola. Suarez is 9-0 with a 1.36 ERA. And Suarez is a guy that has to pitch to his spots, doesn't throw hard, lefty. Yes, he's a guy that in this day and age is a unicorn from this regard. We know that these pitchers, they're throwing 100 miles an hour gas. They're throwing upper 90s. And everything is going to be hard stuff, hard stuff, hard stuff. Where Suarez is a guy that could barely break a pane of glass. He could probably top out at 92. He throws a lot of soft stuff, a lot of slop, junk. But again, he's a guy that's, not to compare him to Greg Maddux by any stretch, but he's a guy that has to hit his spots. And if he hits his spots and gets the calls, he's a guy that's going to be successful. And he does throw the batters off balance. And for him to be a, dare I say, at least for the first 9 starts of this year, a modern-day Steve Carlton, then the Phillies are going to be in very good shape because they do not have to rely on Zach Wheeler or Aaron Nola. But there is one thing that's going to scare you. Here I go with the cold water, people. And there's plenty of time between now and the trade deadline, but they do need a closer. And their bullpen is very good, but the likes of Jose Alvarado, who will scare you in a big spot, if you ask me, the Gregory Sotos of the world, Sir Anthony Dominguez, those are guys that are very good. But if you want to lock down that 9th inning, and we saw last year with a guy like Craig Kimbrell, who was shipped, well, he was a free agent, went to Baltimore, and how's that going for the Orioles, as he's been the closer, and I believe he's still on the IL ever since he blew a couple of games a few weeks back. But to me, that's their only weakness, the back of the bullpen. Other than that, their lineup, as we all know, is formidable. And this is without Trey Turner, who pulled a hammy and is going to be out for, I believe, another month. But you have Bryce Harper, who's hitting the cover off the ball as of late. Of course, guys like Kyle Schwarber, Alec Bowman, we talked about a few weeks ago, was up with the league leaders in hitting. And they are an offensive juggernaut, especially when things are clicking. So the Phillies, flying high in Philadelphia. Let's see as we continue to monitor them throughout the course of the year. But certainly they are baseball's best right now, maybe by a smidge over the Yankees and Orioles and maybe even the Dodgers for that matter. And the Dodgers in their own right, they lost the back 2 or 3 games to the Diamondbacks, so I'm sure they're still having recurring nightmares of what the D-backs did to them in the divisional series as they swept them out of the postseason. But Phillies, give it up. They've done a phenomenal job, and they've just been fantastic. And another team I want to highlight, too, are the Kansas City Royals. 32-19. Are they doing it with smoke and mirrors? Think about this. The leading hitter on their team, and pretty much in baseball when you think about it, is a guy that was the final piece of the 2015 World Series. He's the last guy that's left standing, and that is the one Salvador Perez. Not only is he batting .343, and remind you, he's a catcher, and he's what? He's got to be in his mid-30s at this point. He's also leading the team in home runs, RBIs, OPS, on-base percentage. I mean, he's leading in all categories. And this team that has Bobby Witt Jr., who they gave the long-term contract, and MJ Melendez, good defensive center fielder, but it's not as if they have a lineup that you could really be shaking in your boots if you're the opposing manager. And their rotation, led by, Met fans remember him, Seth Lugo, 7-1 with a 1.73 ERA, but it's not as if that they have stout starting pitching either. And their bullpen, although they have a closer that has given them 12 saves to date, I got to pull up his name again. I was doing a little research on the Royals just yesterday, just to get a better feel for them, because it's not as if I'm watching Kansas City Royal baseball here on a day-on-day-out basis. But when you look at their record, and they've won 6 in a row, and then the Guardians, which I'll get to in a minute, because they're neck and neck with them, with the Guardians leading the division there in the AL Central. But for Kansas City, and as I look at their pitching stats, their closer is a guy that's not a household name, is a guy that's not going to jump off of anybody's page. But James McArthur, when you look at it, all right, he's got 11 saves, and even a guy like John Schreiber with 12 holds, those are guys that they're going to try to have the same formula or similar formula from their championship days, because think about it, they had guys like Kelvin Herrera, Wade Davis was your closer. They had a very good bullpen, and their starting pitching wasn't necessarily off the charts with guys like Johnny Cueto, Yordano Ventura, may he rest in peace. You know, so you had guys like that. Chris Young, who is a guy that's currently a GM in Major League Baseball. So for the team that has really overachieved here in the early part of the season, and James McArthur is a guy that, like I said, he has 11 saves, but he hasn't been lights out. His whip is way over 1. His ERA is over 4. And for whatever reason, he's been able to close these games out. Maybe not as pretty as you'd like, but can the Royals continue to go on this pace to where they can be a contender there in the AL Central? It's easy to say, probably not. It's easy to say that they'll probably fall by the wayside, but let's hope that they can hang around and be a team that can maybe contend for a division title, because even with the AL, other than Baltimore, the Yankees, and whomever's going to come out of the AL West, there may be some opportunities for a Royal team or a team like that that could squeeze in to the postseason when we get to October and get themselves to be one of the top 6 in the AL. So that's what we have there with those two teams. Phillies, we all know they're going to be good. Royals really showing that they're hanging around here as we get to Memorial Day. And as far as the Guardians go, now the Guardians have been a team that surprised me. I didn't think that they were going to be that good, considering Shane Bieber and him not being in the rotation, and a new manager after Terry Francona and a one Stephen Vogt. But they've done very well, and they've actually hit Jose Ramirez. For whatever the reason, he's in the middle of every rally, as we know. Could be an MVP candidate when it's all said and done. And the Guardians have been in first place after the Twins had that run where they won 12 straight earlier in the month. But how I look at the Guardians right here, they'll probably be the division winner when it's all said and done, because the Royals will come back to the pack. Maybe the Twins will contend there. The Tigers are starting to fall off the face of the earth as they're 3 games under 500. So with the Guardians, let's see if they can continue their good stretch here and continue to build on this as we get deeper into this baseball season. And again, I'll cover a lot of that stuff there on Monday. But the Guardians, who just came off of sweeping the Mets, no shock there. And I'm not even going to get into the Mets. Maybe I'll get into them more on Monday, as they're now 7 games under 500. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But as we take a look at the standings heading into the weekend, the Mariners will close out a 4-game series against the Yankees. They won the first 2. They lost yesterday, so they have an afternoon tilt. Let's see if they can get 3 out of 4 from the Bombers, as the Yankees won yesterday behind the 2 home runs by Juan Soto, who's becoming a conquering hero. And although Aaron Judge has been red hot ever since he got ejected from that game a few weeks back, so the Yankees continue to play well despite the fact that they had the hiccup there earlier this week. And then you have the Rangers, who are trying to see if they can salvage a game in Philadelphia, as I mentioned. They are currently, 3 games back of the Mariners. We talked about what's happening in the Central, as the Guardians and Royals are just separated by 2 games. Yankees have a 1-game lead, but 3 in the division over the Orioles. And as far as the National League, it looks like the NL Central is going to be similar to the AL Central, where the Cubs and Brewers may fight it out. Who knows if St. Louis has a run in them, as they're 5 back, although they're 3 games under 500, and they've actually won 3 in a row here to start off their week. And surprisingly, winning the 2 games against the Orioles, where one of the games has to be made up, and that's going to actually be today, is that not? Yeah, between the Cardinals and Orioles. So we'll get to see what's going to happen with them. But as we take a look at the weekend, see if we have any interesting games over the Memorial Day weekend. Yankees go out to San Diego to play the Padres, and they're not going to have Xander Bogaerts, who after diving for a grounder fractured his shoulder, out indefinitely. So the Padres, who've actually played well here, now they're going to miss their shortstop. So who knows how much of a blow that's going to be. And yes, the Orioles will play the Cardinals this afternoon. Excuse me. So we have wait, let me just double check that. No, they're actually going to be in Chicago because my schedule's showing up on Wednesday, so my apologies, people. Baltimore will be in Chicago, looks like for a 4-game series, but for Bogaerts is going to be out. And after today's game, getaway game, the Yankees will go out to the West Coast. And in fact, it's going to be a 10-game or 9-game road trip. 3 in San Diego, 3 in Anaheim, and then 3 in San Francisco. So a long road trip for the Yankees awaits. Then you have the games today. I don't know if these games bleed into the weekend. San Diego's in Cincinnati, so that's a getaway game for them before they come back home against the Yanks. Atlanta and Chicago, the Cubs today. But as far as the weekend goes, Atlanta at Pittsburgh. Paul Skeens, I think, is pitching today. Or did he pitch last night? I got to double check that. I know that Skeens was due to pitch yesterday, so let's see how he did real quick, because I know Skeens with that performance there on Friday against the Cubs, where he gave up no hits, 6 innings. In fact, Skeens did not pitch yesterday. That was the other good pitcher who had a decent start, Jared Jones, and that was in a loss to the Giants in 10 innings, so he got a no decision there. But I'm looking for Skeens to see whether or not he's going to be on the docket today, San Francisco. Yeah, Skeens will pitch this afternoon before San Francisco comes to New York to play the Mets over the weekend. So we'll see how Skeens does. But other than that, Dodgers are playing in Cincinnati, Milwaukee at Boston, Texas at Minnesota, Chicago at St. Louis as the Cardinals try to inch closer to the Cubs in the division, Guardians at Anaheim, Houston at Oakland. Yeah, those are your big games. You're not going to get crazy Miami, Arizona, and Kansas City at Tampa. All right, we'll give you that one. Seattle at Washington. So that is your baseball heading into the holiday weekend. Looking forward to seeing what comes out of that as we will talk about more of where we're at with baseball. And again, 5 teams right now look like to be the front runners when it comes to possibly winning a World Series. And I don't know if there's going to be anybody else besides those 5 teams. And if you haven't figured it out, we'll discuss it and unpack it there on Monday's podcast. Now let me turn my attention to a couple other things before I bid adieu. I know I can get into some NFL stuff with Aaron Rodgers and what he said the other day. And no shock there. He's saying that if we don't have a big year, chances are they're going to clean house. Everybody's going to be out of here. And the coach was going to be first one out the door. So that's going to be no shock in that regard. But you would think if Rodgers has a productive year, but the defense fails, or let's say even if he has a terrible year, who knows? But I'm not going to really get into all that as far as what the Jet quarterback had to say. And we can talk about a couple other things. I know Devontae Parker retired after 9 years in the NFL. The longtime Dolphin played with the Patriots as well. So he wants to spend more time with his kids. Kudos to him as he goes off into the sunset. So best of luck in the next chapter of his life. So NFL is going to remain quiet here until a lot of these draft picks sign, as OTAs are pretty much completed. And now as we take a break from that before training camp, which will be 2 months from around this time. And boy, I can certainly wait for those 2 months before we can even talk about training camp. So yes, I know the NFL fan is probably saying, JAYREELZ, you're nuts. You're not geeked up for an NFL season. No, summer hasn't even officially begun. We haven't even gotten to the unofficial beginning of summer. Why would I anticipate an NFL season? Can we get to Memorial Day? Can we get to the month of June, to the official start of summer, to the 4th of July, to barbecues, to beach, to sand, to surf, to sun before we can even talk about NFL football? That's where I'll leave it there. Now let me get to the French Open, because we have the second Grand Slam of the tennis season, which will tee off there, Roland Garros. And how I'm going to look at this tournament is going to be predicated on 2 things. On the men's side, Rafael Nadal. What's the deal with his health? We know that Nadal has won this tournament 14 times. We know he's an all-time great. We know that this could be the beginning of the end based on his health here and not performing on any of these major tournaments over the last year or so. So it's been under wraps on whether or not he's going to show up there on Sunday or Monday, a la Superman, where he's going to open up his warm-up jacket to maybe not show the S underneath. But what's the status with Rafael Nadal? Is he even going to play? And we understand that if there's going to be one tournament that you know he's going to show up and going to be relatively healthy for, it's this one. So we don't know anything about it as of right now, 10:43 a.m. on Thursday, May 23rd. So I'm sure we're going to hear in the next day or so. This can't be a game, match, or match time, match game decision, whatever you want to call it. So that is the big question mark, number one. And then on the flip side of that, with the women's side, who is going to be second fiddle to Iga Swiatek, or Swiatek? I know that's how you pronounce it. The Polish tennis star who has won back-to-back French Opens and 3 of the last 4. She's won 4 overall, but this is her surface. This is definitely her domain. So you have to really think long and hard. Is there going to be an opposition or an opponent that's going to at least try to put the brakes on this back-to-back French Open championship for Swiatek? I don't know if there is going to be. And yes, we could go through the names. We could go through the competition, whether your name is Aryna Sabalenka, Coco Gauff, Elena Rybakina. Now, you're not going to see Jessica Pegula, the 5th overall women's player in the world, as she's been nursing some injuries. So you're not going to see her. Maybe you'll see her at Wimbledon, which will be at the end of next month. But who's going to be that stalwart that's going to not slow down, but is going to stop Iga Swiatek from getting her 3rd in a row and 4th in 5 years? To me, those are the two storylines, because if Nadal's not going to show up, then we know who the usual suspects you would think would be at the top or would be favored to win. And that's not even saying Novak Djokovic, because Djokovic, who has not had a good year so far in a lot of these small tournaments leading up to the French. And he just turned 37 yesterday. So does Djokovic have another encore in him this year as a guy that can maybe win another major, whether it be here at the French or at the All England Club at Wimbledon, or maybe even at Flushing Meadow before the year is out? I don't know, because the competition is going to be stiff. Whether your name is Jannik Sinner, whether your name is Carlos Alcaraz, Holger Rune, Casper Ruud, Daniil Medvedev, Alexander Zverev. So to me, I'm looking at this French Open, and even though we could talk about the guys, Jannik Sinner in particular, who has played very well here over the last year, even Carlos Alcaraz, who I think needs to get a tournament win under his belt. And yes, I understand he won Wimbledon last year, but US Open, not so good. And even at the French. So to me, he's got to get to minimum semifinal or even a final to kind of stamp himself back. And granted, what is he, 20 years old? He's about to be 21 at some point this year if he hasn't turned 21 yet. So to me, I think it's wide open, this tournament. And the only reason why I bring up Nadal is because we don't know whether or not he's going to play. By now, we would think that, all right, well, Nadal's going to participate. Let's see how much gas he has in the tank, considering that this is his tournament. This is pretty much, when you think about his all-time status, and you can say that for a lot of people, whether it's Novak Djokovic winning, 9 Australian Opens, and for this particular instance, for Rafael Nadal, he's won 14 of his, 21 Grand Slams, maybe 22, here on this surface. So why wouldn't he give it a go, even if he's 85% healthy? Maybe he's thinking of the long game, maybe he's thinking of Wimbledon. He wants to be 100% so he could get on that softer surface and then build up to get to a US Open. I don't know. It's all a big, giant question mark as of right this moment. So we'll see whether or not he's going to participate. But other than that, I really think it's wide open, because it's not a slam dunk that Novak Djokovic is going to all of a sudden be the favorite to win this tournament. And with Alcaraz not being 100% himself, I know he's nursed some injuries too as well. Not necessarily recently, but just dating back to last year, even before Wimbledon. Because remember, at the French last year, he lost to Djokovic in the heat in that one match. I believe it was in the semifinal, if I'm not mistaken. Or if not, it could have been a quarterfinal. So it's all wide open there for the men's. And for the women's, it's a lot smaller, because that window belongs to Iga Swiatek. And whether or not she's going to slam the door on the opposition, chances are that could be the case. how I'm going to look at it is, until somebody takes it away from Swiatek, I think she's going to come out smelling roses again. And on the men's side, I'm going to root for Carlos Alcaraz. I'd like to see him win the French Open. I'd like to see him get his second major under his belt. Maybe Sinner. Who knows what Vegas has him as far as a favorite, or who is the favorite to win this tournament. I think Djokovic, he will be in the mix, but I can't see him being just the overall lock to win this thing. And for the aforementioned Medvedev and Zverev and Casper Ruud, Holger Rune, I mean, those guys are formidable in their own right. So to me, let's see what happens. I'm looking forward to it. And even Nick Kyrgios, he's a guy that I understand nursing knee injuries and has not participated in a lot of these major tournaments over the last year or so. So it's all there for the taking. Start Sunday, looking forward to it. And you know, yours truly will be on top of that. And then lastly, the Indy 500. I know in years past, as I get into the front seat and rev up the engine as I put the tennis racket away, Indy 500. I know I've talked about this every late May, how this is the one almost path and right to summer, where the Masters in early May is almost a right to spring, when you get to see the azaleas and you get to see that beautiful golf course in its majesty and its majestic surroundings. And when you think of the Masters, that's when you really think about spring. No, it's not the NCAA tournament, not even baseball for that matter, because when you get to turn the calendar into April and you get to watch that tournament, you get a sense of spring. Even though in the Northeast, you never get spring until around this time in late May. But now, for the Indy 500 as a boy, with the Jackie Stewarts of the world and the AJ Foyts and the Mario Andretti's, those race car drivers of yesteryear, whenever I got to that Sunday, Memorial Day, where you think about baseball doubleheaders as a boy, now I'm dating myself back to the 70s, of course, and I'll say this one last time because you could go back to last year's podcast and the year before that and the year before that, and it's pretty much the same tune. But I promise I will pivot from that in a moment. But the Indy 500, that was summer. That was it. The cover of Sports Illustrated that week always showed the guy drinking the milk with the roses around his neck, showing that he was the Indy 500 champion. That was a part of Americana. And over the last, I would say, 20, 30 years, it's a forgotten sporting event. Maybe not in Indianapolis or Indiana, but for a lot of the sports fans in the landscape, it's almost as if, oh, Indy 500, they're still racing that? Yeah, they still are. Now, listen, I am not going to come out and say who's going to win. I can talk about the Helio and Castroneves of the world, who I believe won a couple of years ago, and that just goes to show you. I don't think he won last year. I think it was the year before that. But the only reason why I bring up the Indy 500, not only to be a little bit nostalgic, but with F1 being as popular as it's ever been. And just a couple of weeks ago, the Miami Grand Prix, I couldn't tell you who won that race if it was in my backyard, if I was in Miami for the weekend. But the F1, and I understand they're not tied in with the Indianapolis 500. I get that. But if that's popular, how come there's zero to very little buzz for the Indy 500, considering everything that I just detailed leading up to this? And right, I'm not breaking out the black and white pom-poms, gentlemen, start your engines for the Indy 500, because it's not as if I'm going to be here on a Sunday afternoon, which in all likelihood, it's going to be mid to upper 70s, maybe low 80s and sunny. I want to get outside, enjoy the weather, enjoy the weekend. I'm not going to be on my sofa watching every lap of the Indy 500. So hand raise high in the air. I only bring it up for the standpoint of what the event once was and what it is today. And considering how F1 is huge, one more time, I understand there's no correlation, but how come they're not getting any love? I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if it's because the Indy 500 is a washed event in that regard. Who knows? But it is an interesting question, especially for people my age, maybe a little bit younger, who knew that when you got to late May and that 12 o'clock start time, Sunday, ABC, it was an event. People followed it. And it was covered as if it was a major event. And now, is it even covered at all? I'm sure it is. I'm not going to go as far as saying that it's completely off of everybody's map. But you have to really think about it, where this Indy 500, and over the last, I would say, at least dozen years, is it an afterthought? And why isn't it getting any love? So I wish I had the answer to that. I wish I had a better finger on the pulse when it comes to that, and maybe I should have even delved into that heading into the weekend. But nostalgia aside, let's see. And again, I couldn't even tell you who's in the race. I can tell you who's winning, and maybe you could say, well, JAYREELZ, come on, how can you bring this up, talk about it, and then not even know who's in the race? Well, do you see me talking about NASCAR, Daytona 500, a lot of these other, the Super Bowl of racing, and that is overshadowed the Indy 500 by far. And I get it, that's NASCAR, and that's totally separate. Maybe it's a thing where Indianapolis 500 has to tie themselves in with Formula One. I don't know, but that's something that's way over my head, but it does get brought up here. And yes, let's see what's going to happen there at the Indianapolis Speedway Sunday to see who comes out on top and wins the Indy 500. Other than that, people, that's what I got for you. A nice, tidy podcast heading into the weekend, and I love it. I don't like to go more than an hour, and I get it. There's a lot going on, a lot of sports, but with the conference finals now down to each of their final four, I'm not expounding on earlier series where I have to go through 8 series in each of these sports and things of that nature. So now it's starting to dwindle down to its precious few, and just to know that you take precious time and carve that out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the sports. Not only do I appreciate that, I'm grateful for you guys and gals. Thank you so much for stopping by. And just like I mentioned at the top, please subscribe, rate, review on whichever podcast platform you listen to. Of course, the website, JAYREELZ.com. Also, follow my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, one more time, at JAYREELZ on YouTube, where I post content daily. And I got some vlogs in the works. I know I talked about this last week and even piggybacked it on Monday, something that I'm working on. So if you stay tuned to this channel, I'll keep you up to date as to when it will be released, instead of being a little bit showing some hubris to think that I have it on this day, but with technical difficulties and things of that nature. I know you don't want to hear that, but that's what happened. But keep your eyes on the prize, keep your eyes on the dial to know when the latest updates, not only in the world of sports, with the vlogs and with yours truly. Please subscribe, like, leave a comment, tell your friends, frenemies, foes, etc. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. Because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA. As I always like to say, talking sports is what I do. This is why I took the leap from corporate America to do this, to hopefully one day be gainfully employed, to have your support and your unwavering support. Continue to do so, people. Independent podcasting at its finest, with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. On the flip, baby.